MadPal's webinar series. For those of you not familiar with us, we are a design agency that strives to help people improve their health and wellness, reach their financial goals, learn, and connect. But enough about us. Today, Amy Bucher, Behavior Change Design Director at MadPal, and Steve Schwartz, Chief Science Officer at Individualytics, will share their insights on the art and science of applying behavioral economics to digital health design. A little bit about Amy. Amy focuses on crafting, engineering, and motivating solutions that help people change their behavior in meaningful and positive ways. Previously, she worked at CVS and Johnson & Johnson Health and Wellness Solution Group. Amy spent many years working on digital health coaching tools and the intersection of technology and behavior change. The programs she has helped design include health risk assessment, chronic health management programs, behavioral health interventions, and wellness programs for distribution by health plans or employers. Her research interests include motivational design, patient and user engagement, happiness, and how social relationships influence health and well-being. Amy received her AB magna cum laude in psychology from Harvard University and her MA and PhD in organizational psychology from the University of Michigan. A little bit about Steve. He is actively engaged in a variety of initiatives in the digital health and data analytics market spaces. He has been for over a decade. As part of the behavioral science team that created and evaluated the suite of health media digital health coaching products prior to, during, and after the company's acquisition of Johnson & Johnson in 2008, Dr. Schwartz has been part of the digital innovation curve in healthcare for many years. As boarded clinician psychologist, Dr. Schwartz has significant theoretical and practical expertise in cognitive behavior psychology, learning theory, positive psychology, behavioral economics, clinical trials, program evaluation, human-centered and instructional design, and gamification. So now that you know them, a few housekeeping items before we get started. We'll be sure to leave 15 minutes at the end for questions, so make sure you put them in the sidebar as a direct message to me, the host, or to the group. We'll be live tweeting with #MadPal, and slides will be available on our site in a couple of days. Notifications will be sent through our social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Google+, so be sure you're following us on all channels. There you can also learn about upcoming webinars, speaking engagements, events, and more. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy and Steve.
Thank you so much, Liz. So as Liz mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the art and science of applying behavioral economics to digital health interventions, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's something that we see a lot of people working on, and we believe that there is an opportunity to do it more effectively. So just to give you the plot of today's webinar, we'll give you a little bit of our story and why we're so interested in this. And then we'll give you a primer on what is behavioral economics and how do you think about the way that people make decisions to help you implement these techniques. We'll give you some examples of how people have implemented these techniques in the past and where they may have gone wrong, but then we'll give you the recipe for doing it better, more effectively. So really thinking about both the person, the user you're designing for, and the journey that they're on. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some questions and conversation. And we're looking forward to hearing your questions. Please feel free to submit those at any point as we're talking, and Liz will be collating those so that we can talk through them at the end. Just really quickly, you've heard our biographies, but and part of why we're here, Steve and I were colleagues together at Johnson & Johnson years ago, and part of what we did in that job was build custom digital health behavior change solutions for external clients. This was back when we were working for a startup that J&J later acquired. So we both have a lot of experience working directly with clients who are really paying attention to the competitive atmosphere. They want to build the best possible solutions for their audiences, for their users. And sometimes they really latch onto what we could call bright, shiny objects. They say, oh, you know, behavioral economics is a really hot thing right now. Well, let's bring behavioral economics into the solution. And what I've personally struggled with in my career is wanting to give my clients what they want, fulfill their requests and make them happy, but also wanting to do that in a way that really effectively brings about the results that they're looking for. And it's not as easy as just taking a behavioral economics idea and slapping it into your solution, which is really the focus of what we'll talk about today. So Steve, if you want to give your story.
Absolutely. So just to kind of build on what Amy's talking about, what I kind of hope the audience takes away from our discussion today is Number one, that the application of behavioral economics and other kinds of behavioral science theory really does need to begin from a strategic view. And what we hope to give you today is a framework for starting to organize how these various tactical elements may apply to a program or design that you guys are working on. And then with the goal here really to say that a more thoughtful approach to design and the theoretical aspects of behavioral science are more than just academic, because they do have very important implications for how design works. So let's start with a concept of traditional economics. And traditional economic models of the consumers and consumer behavior are really designed to make predictions about how people will evaluate and arrive at decisions to buy. And traditional economic theory does this from three basic assumptions. The first assumption is that people will make choices from a rational or a logical perspective. The second assumption is that these decisions are made to result in the highest value outcome for the consumer. And then lastly, the assumption is that people who are making economic choices are doing so autonomously, meaning they are making acts of free will where they have complete information and decisional choice relative to the available options. Now, economists realize that these are somewhat extreme in their positions, but they still rely on these simplifications in order to make predictions about what people will do in an economic situation. And yet they often fail to describe or predict economic behavior. For example, they don't explain very well people who will consistently choose one option over another in a choice where all of the options are identical in meaning or value. They don't explain very well people whose investments are doing poorly, but they continue to pump money into them. And they don't really explain well people who acknowledge that a possession is no longer useful to them, but who refuse to part with it. So traditional economic theory then assumes that the consumer is using logic to understand their behavior and to understand the choices they make. And if you think about healthcare in particular, and those three assumptions that I laid out, you'll recognize that in the economic choices we make as consumers in healthcare, none of those elements or those assumptions hold true. So let's take a look at what makes people really tick to understand why behavioral economics is a more valuable and perhaps more important in terms of implications for program design to traditional economic models. So one of the things that we want to think about are that our technology changes faster than our biology. So while we have great digital tools now that can gather information, present us with information, evaluate that information, we need to remember that we as end users are continuing to experience that information with a central nervous system that evolved many years ago and has certain ingrained characteristics that we need to consider in terms of creating an experience that's valuable, easy, and changes behavior in the user. So where do we begin? The first is that we have to recognize that human beings have a strong survival-driven desire to optimize our experiences in the here and now and to reduce our pain and optimize pleasure. And if you think about how people even interact in the digital world today, they want the immediacy of value. So why is that true? What is it about human nature that holds true? So we want to begin with two basic aspects of how the human central nervous system works. So the first is a concept in psychology that we call dual processing. And this notion of dual processing basically holds that there are two aspects, functional aspects of the human mind that work very intimately together, but they have distinct advantages and disadvantages. So there is an emotional brain that is really mediated through the structures of our limbic system, and there's a logical brain that is mediated through our neocortex. And those two elements we'll talk in a moment about how they influence the kind of decisional choices we make and why they are there and what value they hold. The second, so we have dual processing, which is these two parts of the brain, the emotional brain and the logical rational brain. And then the second is what we call the hedonistic bias. And that basically holds that the human brain is geared towards evaluating and processing information that leads to a tendency or a value to favor what is easy, efficient, and pleasurable in the now. And these two processes of the brain, when taken in a context of healthcare design and choices, can often lead to errors. So let's look at this notion of hot and cold brain, why we have them and what their value is and how they work in everyday functioning. So the emotional fast or hot brain is what we typically use in making decisions, everyday choices. Most people make the assumption, and traditional economics also makes the assumption, that it's the cold brain that does most of our decisional choices. But really, if we think about how we make choices, we tend to use rules of thumb, we tend to use shortcuts, things that help us to be efficient and filter out all of the information overload that we are exposed to every day. So that hot brain really makes us efficient and effective in dealing with the everyday world. But it is often sacrificing some of the logic that goes with the cold brain. And then that hot brain, therefore, is subject to making important errors that can lead to health compromise. Now, that cold brain is the rational, logical brain, but it is very rarely engaged relative to how hot brain influences everyday decision making. So let's kind of deconstruct this concept of hedonistic bias and talk about 4 concepts that are very specific to design that help us now apply this sort of theoretical approach to understanding the nervous system to what you actually might build and present to an end user. The first is this notion of simplicity over complexity. Make it easy for the end user. People will gravitate towards problems with fewer variables rather than more complex variables and problems. So even though simplifying a decision can result in some loss of information, it doesn't necessarily degrade the quality of the information and the outcome. So it is important to provide some level of choice to your end user, but to make choices as simple and straightforward as possible. The second is this notion of information in a context. People will weigh information differently depending on the context that they're in. So, for example, people often get frustrated who go to buffets because they're given small plates at the front end of the buffet. That's intentionally done because that plate becomes the informational context that drives how people will choose food. Smaller plate means smaller portion sizes. Larger plate means larger portion sizes, even in individuals with the same degree of hunger. So understanding the situational context is very important, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about anchoring. The next is this concept of bounded willpower, and it goes back to that notion that the central nervous system of the human nature is one that is still largely based on a hunting and gathering society. So there is a tendency for us to have an innate favorability to choices that bring a more immediate value and to discount choices that have value realized at some point in the future. And if you think about bounded willpower within the context of health behaviors and health risks, you'll recognize that health compromising behaviors tend to provide very deep and natural immediate value. Eating that sundae feels very good. Eating that steak feels very good in the here and now. And that health promoting behaviors, things like exercise or diet that is like a DASH diet, provide value somewhere down the road, but that value is often vague and hard to realize over time. So when you think about design within the healthcare space, you're really working against this innate tendency towards bounded willpower. And then lastly is the concept of loss aversion. Loss aversion means that we are much more likely and more motivated to protect things that we already have in our possession from being lost, rather than work hard for something that we even want but don't own. It's very much a bird in the hand kind of mentality.
So now we're going to talk through a couple of concrete examples of how you see these hedonistic biases applied in digital health design. And I'll point out along the way some of the ways that they maybe aren't as effectively applied as they could be, or they could be maximized. So the first one, and if you know me, you know that I have strong feelings about this, is badges, which you also sometimes see people implement as part of a gamification strategy. The badges you see on the screen now were part of Foursquare, which has since become Swarm. And they were awarded to people as a result of their checking in at different types of businesses regularly as a way to show that they, were a steak aficionado or a gym goer or whatever the case may be. One of the interesting things about these badges that we saw with Foursquare is they actually stopped offering some of them. So the health badges specifically, they discontinued because the original intention was that people would go work out if they were offered these digital badges for checking in at the gym. And if you listen to that sentence carefully, the badges were not for working out, they were for checking in at the gym. And so in fact, they did find that they weren't really promoting exercise behavior, they were promoting people physically going near the gym location, pulling out their phone, checking in, and then going and doing something else. So not meeting their intended obligation. So how does this connect to behavioral economics? Steve mentioned the idea of loss aversion. And with badges, there are two things that you can do to really trigger this idea of loss aversion and get people to continue the behavior that earned them the badge. So the first is endowed progress. And even though this isn't quite badges, the easiest way to explain it is through something like a credit card that has reward points. Oftentimes these programs will start you off with something in the bank. So you don't start at 0 points. You start at, in this case, 75,000 points. And then if you read the fine print, in order to retain those points, in order to make them into something that's actually worth spending, you do have to use that credit card. You have to continue the activity. So even though those 75,000 points in and of themselves may not be enough for you to buy anything meaningful, the fact that you have them in your virtual bank triggers that sense of loss aversion and gets you interested in doing whatever behavior you need to do to maintain. The other one is called withering, and this example here is from the Yelp app. You may not realize it, but the Yelp app that people use to find restaurants and places to go in a local area also awards you badges for checking in. And if you don't check into the same place often enough, the badge will actually fade. And when you look at it, it's growing more, it's like Back to the Future, it's growing more transparent, it's pulsing. The only way to save it and retain it in your collection is to continue to check in at that particular business. So this is another way that badges can be implemented to trigger that sense of loss aversion. Another one you see a lot is penalizing non-participation. So you see this often with your health plans. I know mine, at the beginning of the year, I and my husband both need to go to the doctor for a wellness visit. We need to have a standard blood panel. We need to go online and take a health risk assessment. If we don't complete these variety of activities, our healthcare premiums for the year are higher. So our non-participation is penalized in this case. So this strategy has been proven to work pretty well for getting people to participate in a program one time. I do go for that wellness visit every year because I know that it will cost me if I don't. It's not necessarily effective at changing behavior long term, which is what most of us are trying to do with the digital health apps that we build. So what happens here, the unintended effect, is that penalizing non-participation institutes what's known as the undermining effect. And this is actually a neurological response to reward, where things that we might otherwise find inherently pleasurable, things that we might be motivated to do ongoing, become less interesting to us because we start to think that we should only do this when we're being paid for it. So in fact, it ends up cutting short the motivation that we're trying to build in for people. And one way that you can hopefully combat this is by tying your incentives to the right outcomes for maximum efficacy. So in the case I mentioned with my health insurance plan, I'm being paid essentially to provide information to this company. It might be more effective for them if they were paying me for some sort of health outcome that is valuable to them. So it's a different way to think about it. The next one is called fixed schedule billing, and if you've ever belonged to a gym, you have experienced this most likely. This is the billing strategy where you provide your credit card, and then every month on a certain day, it's billed a certain amount. And if you'd like to cancel it, it is incredibly complicated to do. The companies that use this are banking on the fact that you may not remember that this money is coming out of your account every month, and even if you do, it's very difficult to get out of it, so you may let it ride. There's something also called the status quo bias in behavioral economics, where once something is already in place, where it's very hard for us to get the motivation to make a change. So, all right, fine, you're charging me $30 a month. I guess that's what it will be. There's also, Steve mentioned before, the sunk cost fallacy. This is the same idea as when people continue to pump money into a failing investment. What many of us do with these fixed schedule billing processes is we think, well, maybe I'll use it someday, so I'll keep paying for it because otherwise I might have to pay that joining fee again. We start to make up these reasons why it would be a bad thing to make a change. And what it ends up doing in terms of behavior change is you get stuck in one course of action and you don't explore other possibilities that may actually be more effective for you. So my recommendation in general would be not to implement this sort of strategy into your digital health behavior change app. It makes economic sense for some companies, but if your real goal is behavior change, it is not an effective strategy. Then there's this idea of consistency and the discounting effect. Oftentimes with health behavior change apps, we really want to personalize them and make them very individual for the person who's using them. And a strategy that we use a lot, because we want to build people's self-efficacy, their sense of ability to make a change, we want them to feel good about their power to do something, is we'll remind them of successes that they've had in the past. So this is something you can do really well with personalization. If you have been a yoga aficionado for many years, and I know that about you, I can build that into your program and talk to you about your successful yoga pose. I'm sorry, I'm not a yoga person. I realize I should probably not use that example for that reason, but whatever yoga accomplishments you've had, we can remind you of them. What can happen though sometimes, especially as people age and their abilities change and they are facing chronic health conditions that they may not have had in the past, is that you might be reinforcing an identity that no longer works for somebody. So if someone was a successful long distance runner at a certain point in their life, and now they're facing orthopedic surgery, there's a really clear disconnect between the success they enjoyed in the past and where they're going in the future. So it's important to think about that and not over-rely on this idea of consistency. We want to be the person that we think we are, and instead try to balance between consistency and experimentation. This is something Pandora does really well. Once you've set your music preference, it knows what your fingerprint is, and it will randomly throw in songs that don't fit that fingerprint to see what your reaction is. Sometimes you like those songs, even though the algorithm would suggest that they are not right for you. And that gives Pandora valuable information that it can use to help you learn and grow your music preferences. So then the final example I'll give you is around anchors. If you have ever taken a negotiation course, you know that anchors are a really important tool that you can use to guide and influence other people's decision-making processes. Once we see a number, even if we understand on some level that it's not logically meaningful, we start to base all of our subsequent thoughts and decisions around that number. In health behavior change, we use anchors a lot. So we use them oftentimes when we provide guidelines to people, and we sometimes use them when we provide normative feedback. So what are other people doing? The example I'm going to show you here is around the recommended minutes of moderate or high intensity exercise that people should get each week. So if you imagine you have a digital health app that is supposed to help somebody manage their weight or manage a chronic condition or even just get more active, this is a number that you may show them. Well, say you have Carl. Carl is a user, and his typical number of minutes of moderate or high intensity exercise each week are 0 because Carl is a couch potato. Then you have Ironman Dan, and his are 450 because he is doing an Ironman, which is incredibly intense and requires months, if not years of training. For both of these users, that anchor is demotivating. For Carl, it is so unachievable that he is not going to feel like he has the ability to get even close. For Dan, it is so far below what he is able to do that he is not going to feel like he needs to make any changes either. And what you can do with these two examples, with Carl, you might consider goal scaffolding. You might consider taking those 150 minutes and breaking them down into smaller increments that he can gradually work his way through. His first week, his goal is 10 minutes. Over time, he'll get to 150. For Dan, what you might do is actually provide him with selected normative feedback. You might actually compare him to other super athletes in your user group and help him create a community and a sense of progress among those people. So those are two different strategies that you can use to make anchors more effective.
So when Amy's talking about personalization, we all really begin to think that personalization is the goal to go after in order to really reach the end consumer, to make the experience sticky. So what's interesting about personalization and contextualization is that psychology has a long history in looking at human nature and what makes people tick from the notion of commonalities and individual differences. So in some ways, we are all alike. We have common needs for love, security, belonging, meaning. And yet, in many ways, we're all very unique. We're uniquely made by our God, our DNA, our cumulative experiences. And so one of the things that we need to think about, and Amy's anchoring example is a perfect illustration of that, is where is the person beginning their journey? And how do people's journeys vary? And what are the typologies of journeys that we're trying to both push people into for their greater health and pull them out of in terms of the journey they're on that is health compromising? The other aspect of individual differences that needs to be accounted for is what we call within differences, meaning we have a consistency of self across situation and time, but we also can adapt to different situations, and so that we behave differently under certain sets of circumstances. The other thing we know about individual differences is that the cool part of the brain is where individual differences show most. So things like need for cognition, or in general intelligence, or numeracy, or the ability to understand statistical concepts, are where individual differences show their greatest variation. Our hot brain is where people tend to be more commonly connected. It is a more primitive aspect of the brain and its functioning. So when we think about situational differences, take loss aversion, for example, which predicts that people will be reluctant to get rid of an item that they already own. We can mitigate that by creating a give and get situation where the person is receiving something in order to give up the item that they have to relinquish. And so there are pieces of situational differences that we can create in our own design that can mediate some of these general tendencies depending on what the overall goal of the design is. What are some of the things that can contribute to individual differences? Well, when I do creating personas, or when we do journey mapping, and Amy had discussed journey mapping as a particularly useful characteristic, I sort of look at my persona in several different layers and levels. I begin with what we know about human nature and personality characteristics, those things that are enduring about people, that have shown consistently to show how people are different from one another on these characteristics. And OCEAN is an acronym I like to use for what's called the 5-factor solution of personality. where the O stands for openness, and people differ on their level of openness, their comfort with novelty or sameness or change. The C is for conscientiousness, and these are where people vary on how they approach rules and obligations. The E stands for extroversion, which most people are familiar with, and that's your degree of outgoingness or gregariousness. The A is for agreeableness, and that's really just how well you get along with people. Are you the kind of individual who is socially skilled? And then lastly is neuroticism, which is sort of a level of anxiety and angst that you take into the world. And so I look at individuals and persona creation around those broad characteristics. I also look at then what are the kinds of experiences and acquired learnings that I want and imagine my end user to have as they enter into the experience. What kind of skills and talents might they have, or do I want to build them into as a part of the experience design? And then what are the individual circumstances, their baseline situation that might be relevant to what they need, and how I can help them move on to the goals that they're going to set for themselves. So those would be their more contextualized circumstances. What are their relationships like? What is their work status? And then we can begin to start the build out of user types and personas that help us meet the needs of each of our users along that sort of journey path.
Some of the tools that we typically use in our design process in order to understand these between differences include personas, or behavioral archetypes. Sometimes you'll see psychographic profiles or database segmentation. These are really all different ways at getting at the same idea, which is that we want to understand our end users. And for this particular presentation, knowing that our audience has its roots in design, we're going to walk through two personas really quickly. And I will make a brief point because I know personas have some controversy attached to them in terms of how do you really make sure that they are an effective and accurate tool for understanding users, as opposed to just a fictional story that doesn't really add value to the project. So hopefully I'll be able to make a few quick points about how you can make these a more effective design tool. So very quickly here, meet Mary Ellen. As you can see, she's somewhat overweight. She's recently been diagnosed with hypertension. She had gestational diabetes after each of her 3 kids, and now, it previously had kind of resolved itself, but now she's just been diagnosed with type 2. And she has moderate depression, which came on gradually. What you often see with personas as a next step is this layer of almost like demographic variables. So you've got her age, her job, her kids' ages, and then tech savvy, which as a detail is particularly not useful because with Mary Ellen, does this mean that she is coding AI in her free time, or does it mean that she's comfortable with her iPhone? They're very, very different things, and the term tech savvy doesn't really help to communicate which one is meant. So don't go this route. Instead, and hopefully you're basing this on research that you've done with actual potential users. And this is Sarah, so same health background as Mary Ellen, which I also want to make a little bit of a point about here. But with Mary Ellen, now let's really start to dive into what her life, her situation is like. So here's what tech savvy means. She uses multiple devices every day. She has a smartphone that she uses to play games. She has an iPad that she uses. She works on a computer during the day. So she is very comfortable transitioning between different devices. She's not really confident in her ability to understand the science of her health. So she's looking for her doctors and other experts to tell her what to do. This is not somebody who's going to be on WebMD experimenting with different ways to change her own behavior. She's really looking for that authority and that credibility. Because of her experience with gestational diabetes, she doesn't take her type 2 very seriously. She's coming out of a situation where she has seen this health condition just kind of go away without her doing a lot. So she really doesn't understand the importance of having type 2 and the importance of making changes to manage it. She's got the 3 kids. What's important in terms of designing for Mary Ellen is that means she doesn't have a lot of free time for herself. She's driving her kids places. She's making sure they have their lunches for school. They have their dinners at night. And then in the meantime, she works full time. So she's really not got a lot of time left for herself. She's super organized and conscientious, except when it comes to her own health. And that makes her feel kind of ashamed because on some level, she knows that she could do better. Now you compare that to Sarah, who has the same health profile. She's had type 2 diabetes for 20 years, and she has figured it out pretty much. She has some good strategies that work for her. She's got herself all organized with respect to her health. She's put together a physician care team for herself to deal with her comorbidities as well as her diabetes. And she is really willing to reach out to them when she has questions or wants to try something new. She's also got a flexible job. She's a sculptor. So she has time during the day if she needs to take care of her health. What she's not doing during the day, though, that Mary Ellen is she's not sitting on a computer. Sarah's also got grown kids, which means in the evenings, she is, again, able to spend more time on her own needs if that's what she wants or needs to do. And then the final thing that's really different between these two women is that Sarah's been doing this for a long time, and she struggled at first, and now she's found some success, but she has an expectation that changing her behavior will be difficult. It will take some time. It will take some experimentation. So if you are asking her to try something new, she's going to be a lot more tolerant of it not working out perfectly right away.
So when we think about creating or working through the experience of the end user, there are certain stages that we would want to break that experience down into. And so we think about the first step being a discovery stage, in which how will the end user come into contact with the application of the program? How will you get eyeballs onto that program? And particularly, what is the hook that will then get them to move into that second stage? The second stage is an onboarding phase, and there are certain things that one would want to think about in the onboarding experience that you will want to try to accomplish. Now, not all apps are going to need to accomplish all of these things in the same way, but when you think about the end user touching your application or your program, one of the things that you may want to accomplish, and I would recommend frequently try to accomplish, is first to reinforce the value proposition of your offering. Make sure they understand what it is you've got for them, how it will help them meet their needs, because what you're trying to do is draw them in further. Oftentimes, depending on the nature of the app and its intention, you want to align with that user the expectations for what not only it can provide, but what it can't provide. You may need to orient them to certain tasks, so there may be the need for some kind of tutorial or tutorial-like function so that they understand what and how things work. And then there should be clear action steps for what's next. Importantly, because of the notion of individual differences, there needs to be a plan for what we would call baselining your end user. As we talked about earlier in our example, depending on your level of physical fitness, an anchor could be either motivating or demotivating, depending on that baseline. So what we would want to do is use those baseline metrics to develop goals that are anchored properly. And then, as Amy had discussed earlier, the concept of scaffolding, or what is often called in behavioral sciences sub-goaling, which is moving people to a higher level goal, a goal that they probably could not attain out of the gate, but move them in small, manageable, and reinforceable steps along that journey. And then lastly, you'd need to think about the end game. And throughout that journey, by the way, there is a continual feedback or core loop where you're learning that you did or did not provide value to that end user, and then you adjust your goals and your expectations based on that interactional feedback that you get from the end user. And then you move to your end game, which is really in healthcare, typically a maintenance phase, and then perhaps moving on to another secondary goal. So when we think about those aspects of contextualization, knowing those differences are important. We also need to think about baseline from the within individual differences, because as we develop those goals, good, smart goals for the healthcare practitioners in the audience need to be smart in the sense that they are specific, they are measurable, they are attainable, they're relevant, and they're time boxed. And so that baseline then becomes very important. What are the things you need to think about when we think about within individual differences and what kinds of factors might be part of that context. You need to think about the resources that are available to that person. We talked earlier about freedom of choice. Well, in healthcare, oftentimes we don't have full freedom of choice for available resources, and that we're actually being dictated to in terms of the resources that we have available by our plans. So making choice and smart choices is somewhat dependent on the available resources. You need to think about those cold brain aspects, which is really what is the knowledge, history, and expertise of the individual. Are they new at this? Are they familiar with this kind of data or this kind of presentation? And then again, continual aspect of understanding the contextual factors that the individual is in, the environment, other people that they interact with that either promote health and well-being, or that they turn out to be barriers or context in which health choices are compromised.
So your toolkit here, and again, we've telegraphed this a bit, but as a designer, for understanding the journey that your user on, it might include a journey map or an experience map. You might use a use case. Sometimes you use a timeline or a list of critical milestones. Again, the method of how you do this doesn't really matter, but it is really critical that you somehow understand the situation that your user will be within when interacting with your behavior change intervention. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I tried to preview this a bit with the way that I constructed the personas, but what might a typical day of living with type 2 diabetes look like for Sarah versus Mary Ellen? So Sarah, if you recall, is our sculptor who is, longtime diabetes patient and has really figured out a method that works for her. And what you can see here up the top, the red and the green, are the times of day that she's able to test her blood sugar and administer the insulin that she may or may not need, depending on what her results show. So you can see that she's doing that pretty regularly across the day. And you can also see below in her activities that she's taking the time for regular meals and for a workout. Her schedule allows her to do that, and she knows that that's an important part of taking care of herself and feeling good. Compared to Mary Ellen, who really is much more busy, isn't taking the time for a workout, doesn't eat a real lunch at work, is just kind of grazing and snacking on food that she finds in the office because she's really busy with her job, and isn't doing a lot of the medical management, really just in the mornings and the evenings when she can grab a little bit more time for herself. So these two routines look incredibly different from each other, even though these women have the same health profile. It's important to consider that their journeys may also look really different. So when you're building an intervention, how does this all come together? So I mentioned before, Steve and I both have experience working with clients, and that this happens very often, and I'm not criticizing that this happens by any means, but they come and they have their own ideas, their own passions about what an intervention should include. And so you may be talking to a client who says, I want this app to have in-the-moment feedback for the people using it. And it should have badges, definitely badges, and those badges should expire if people stop doing the behaviors that earn them the badges. And everything the user does, we should compare them against guidelines. We should really be giving them this good evidence-based feedback so they know how they're matching up with target. And then finally, let's make the user feel good. Let's really build some self-efficacy here, and we'll reinforce the user's identity as someone who takes good care of her health. All right, these are all very reasonable things to ask for, and they do all have a basis in behavior change science. But let's think about Mary Ellen and Sarah and how each of them might react to it. So logically speaking, you'd think that Sarah might actually like the ongoing feedback because she's got her diabetes under control. She's got a pretty good handle on what works and what doesn't. But that might not actually be how it plays out, because Sarah's got her system that works for her. She's not getting constant in-the-moment feedback right now. She's not seeing every tiny little fluctuation in her numbers. If she actually starts to see that, she might start feeling frustrated and annoyed because she wasn't necessarily aware that that was happening or caring that that was happening. And then additionally, she's not tethered to a device during the day. So all of a sudden, we're asking her to do something different with her technology than she's been doing. So this might actually end up being something that's very irritating for her, even though she's doing well with it. Mary Ellen, on the other hand, even though her numbers aren't great, might actually love this because she is tethered to a device and she's really used to using apps and other things that give her this in-the-moment feedback. She loves playing her games online. This feels a little bit like a game to her. So it fits her routine and it really helps her manage her diabetes more effectively. I'm just gonna. So what you could do here to make this feature work for both users is let the user determine their feedback frequency. Get the user's buy-in early on in the process during the sign-up, and let them tell you, do I want feedback with every single data point that I put in, or do I want a daily digest, a weekly report? Something like that might allow both Sarah and Mary Ellen to benefit from the feedback without either one of them feeling annoyed or not benefited by it. So next we've got your badges, and those badges that expire. These are your loss aversion tactics. So we're going to give the person some sort of status like, you know, diabetes conqueror, or a badge based on how much time they're spending in their target blood sugar range, and will expire if they go out of range. Again, for Sarah, you might assume right away that this is a good idea because of her successes, but it's actually probably a bad idea because, again, she really takes this seriously. She's been doing this for decades, and this feels kind of glib. This doesn't feel like a serious way to talk about a health condition that she is very serious about. For Mary Ellen, this might be a good hook to get her involved and to get her doing things a couple days in a row. Because if she wants to get better at managing her diabetes, she actually has to change a whole bunch of habits. So for her, any of these little tricks, these little tactics might be helpful. And she doesn't have that same degree of seriousness about her diabetes. For both women, expiring the badge will probably feel aversive, but especially for Sarah because she has a long track record of doing well with her self-care. So what usually happens, or what often happens with these badges, is that they really are rewarded not so much for the behavior that you care about, but they're for something that you're doing within the app. And for someone like Sarah, who's not using a device during the day, but probably taking good care of herself, if you're expiring that badge, it's probably not because she's actually stopped taking care of herself. So that's going to rub her the wrong way. So a suggestion for if you are going to use these badges is that you base them on developmentally appropriate milestones. So as part of the enrollment process, learn about your users, try to baseline them, and then set goals that are appropriate for where they've started out. So, for Sarah, she might get some sort of badge that's really more about her veteran status, or that encourages her to reach out to newly diagnosed patients and help them. For Mary Ellen, sure, maybe some of those initial badges are helpful. Anchors are an important part of coaching and feedback. So this is that comparing everything the user does against guidelines. It's similar to the example I used before. Probably the anchors are going to get different reactions from these two users. So a way to deal with that is to have the users collaborate to select those appropriate goals. I mentioned scaffolding before, the idea of laying out intermediate goals. You could even offer the user, hey, I see that right now you are checking your blood sugar once a day. Maybe let's do twice. Or you can offer them a menu of choices and have them collaborate on that. The nice side effect here, the nice 2-for-1 that you get, is then you have the user buying in on that goal setting. You're really getting them to take some ownership of that goal. Then finally, you have your consistency and discounting effect, reminding people that they have an identity as someone who takes good care of their health. This might actually work quite well for Sarah. This is totally true of her. For Mary Ellen, this is not necessarily true of her, and as I mentioned in her bio, it's something she feels kind of ashamed about. So you may have a backfiring effect here if you just assume that we know you're a person who cares about your health, and it's reflected in the choices you make. It's not reflected in the choices she makes. And again, this is a place where personalization technology can really help, either by using rhetorical questions where you're asking her to do the work to make those connections and you're not putting content out there that's incorrect, or by getting really, really good with the personalization in the content. So really making sure that your language is consistent with the user's history and experience. So your design decisions are going to prioritize understanding the user's baseline status, really knowing who is using your app, calibrating your guidelines and your feedback to be appropriate, offering choice, constrained choice, not limitless choice, but intelligent choice to optimize users' experience, and then acknowledging their individual differences when that's appropriate. So that's that last example. In terms of a process, just to recap, what you want to do is start off by identifying the behaviors that you're changing. What is your outcome? What is your goal? Understanding who is using your intervention and when they are using it. So that's when your personas and your journey maps come into play. Look at those laid out next to each other and decide where are your opportunities to baseline, to take in that information, understanding your user, and personalize. I find it's helpful to create visual artifacts of these things so that you can help communicate amongst all of the members of your team and really establish a shared understanding of who you're building for and what they'll be doing with what you're building. And then mapping those techniques onto the map so you can see the right behavior at the right time. In terms of your best practices, to go way back to what Steve was talking about with the dual systems processing and the reason why behavioral economics exists at all, I'd really encourage you to think about systems and not rules. So don't focus on what behavioral economics tactics are. If you forget what loss aversion is, it's very easy to find excellent information on loss aversion online and many examples of how you might implement it. What you're not going to easily find online, what takes work to understand, is this idea that we react from an emotional place, and when our cognitive, logical brain kicks in, it's highly biased. If you can understand that, you'll get yourself so much closer to successful implementation of behavioral economics. So, related to that, those heuristics, those rules of thumb, put them into context. Really think about, what if I do this to this person in this situation? How will they react? This is really an empathy exercise. If you can put yourself in your user's shoes, if you can really visualize what your user is experiencing, it will help you be more effective in applying these techniques. And then finally, if they're available to you, do take advantage of personalization tactics. So if you're building within a technology infrastructure that allows you to personalize using data, whether that's self-report or third-party data, that can be very helpful. You can also do a lot with targeting. So if you understand the groups that your user belongs to, even things like demographic groups, you can make things feel a little bit more personal if you are intelligent about it. So if that's what you have available to you, I would encourage you to use it because it does help you be more effective with applying behavioral economics to actually implement real change in behavior. So I think with that, we have some time for some questions.
Great, thanks for an awesome presentation. We have a few minutes, so we'll get started on some questions. Somebody asked if you can restate the assumptions list at the beginning. There were 5 assumptions.
The assumptions of traditional economic theory, is that what the question was?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, there are 3 assumptions that traditional economic theory holds. The first is that individuals will be rational and logical in their evaluation of the choices that are available to them to buy or to choose a service. The second is that they will make a choice that optimizes or maximizes the value. And the third then is that they have full range of options to both information about the various choices and the freedom to make the choices among the available options. And one of the points in the talk was that in healthcare particularly, those assumptions are almost never met, which puts the consumer at a distinct disadvantage, and with needs, unmet needs that good design can help overcome.
Perfect, thank you. The other question is, can you restate what OCEAN stands for?
Yes, OCEAN stands for, it's the 5 sort of constructs that people differ on, and it's been proven in a very deep and wide set of research. The O is for openness, the C is for conscientiousness, the E is for extroversion, the A is for agreeableness, and the N is for neuroticism. And of course, those single words have anchors at both ends, so that you can be the opposite of extroversion being extreme introversion. But those are great places to begin to understand how people come at the world along those various personality dimensions.
Perfect, thank you. Another question is, what resources would you recommend to learn more about behavioral economics?
So I am a big fan actually of well-done pop psychology books, because I think if the authors are, to borrow a term from Steve, conscientious about translating the literature accurately, it can be a great way to make it very accessible. So there are 3 popular books on behavioral economics that I think are really good. The first one will surprise nobody. It's Thinking Fast and Slow by Dan Kahneman, who is one of the fathers of behavioral economics. Another is Misbehaving by Richard Thaler, who is another father of behavioral economics. And then the third is Nudge, which is also by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. And that's a more applied book, but I think it does, again, an excellent job of showing how behavioral economics can change behavior. I've also heard really good things about the Michael Lewis book. I think it's The Undoing Project, that's about the evolution of behavioral economics. I haven't personally read it, but I've gotten so much positive feedback on it that it's definitely on my to-read list.
Yeah, I agree. I love those books. The only thing I would add is for those in the audience who are interested in a broader sense of applying behavioral science and psychology to design, good places to start, I think, are Designing for Behavior Change. It's an edited book that I like. The Psychology of Design, Creating Consumer Appeal. And I think another, B.J. Fogg's Persuasive Technology is a very good place for many people to start. And then the last that I found very fascinating actually is a book called Glued to Games by a fellow named Scott Rigby and Ryan out of the Self-Determination Theory group at Rochester. It's a fascinating book about how games actually meet the needs of end users in 3 broad domains around competency, autonomy, and relatedness. And it's I think a fascinating read.
Yeah, I will say the Rigby and Ryan book is excellent. So I'm in on that recommendation too.
Great. Another question is, what safeguards are being put into place to protect consumers against applied BE? I heard something was being passed in legislation. Is this true? I'm not an expert on what is happening at the legislative level, so I can't speak to what is going on there. I do know, so Cass Sunstein, who's at Harvard Law School here in the Boston area, has done a lot of work on the application of behavioral economics, including some of the task forces that you see in the UK and other areas in Europe. His concept is all around what he calls libertarian paternalism, and the idea there is that you can create these nudges, you can structure people's environments to influence them into certain lines of behavior, but it needs to be done with an eye to their personal good and the greater good. So the examples there are things like structuring the organ donation sign-up process so that more people end up being organ donors. I think as a field, behavior change experts, for the most part, are considering the ethics of these tactics and really thinking about applying them in a way that is doing good, not doing harm, not being manipulative in a bad way. So of course you do sometimes see bad actors who are more interested in achieving a business outcome than in actually helping your users. But my hope is that as a field, as we continue to concentrate on the ethical issues, we won't see those people achieving a lot of success, that they'll essentially be ostracized out.
Yeah, I would add to that, and I've always said this to trainees, that psychology is the art of manipulation. The difference in psychology versus other forms of social manipulation is that you're doing it for the contractual, agreed upon good of the patient. And what we're talking about on some level here is there is an element of social engineering, but we should also all recognize that we are already subject to social engineering pressures, and these are largely pressures from large companies, pharmaceutical companies, fast food companies, etc., that are shaping our behavior. So and I agree with both the policymakers and Amy that this needs to be done very thoughtfully, but we can do things that can change the way we perceive these threats. And I think the tobacco industry is a great example through thoughtful social restructuring, but it does need to be thoughtful.
Yeah, and I was just reminded by someone on Twitter too that MadPow actually has a project called the Designer's Oath, which is a voluntary code of ethics for people working in design that is just around these issues. So if you want to check that out, it's easy to find online, and it represents one perspective that we've taken toward that question.
All right, so that's all the time we have for today, but if you have further questions or comments, please reach out to us through Twitter @MadPow, and slides and video will be available on our site in a couple of days. Notifications will be sent out through email and our social media channels, so be sure you're following us to learn about upcoming webinars, speaking engagements, events, and more. But thank you all for tuning in today. We'll be in touch shortly, and thank you to our speakers. All right. Have a great day. Thank you.